All right, everyone. Well, thank you all for being with us. Thank you for joining us this beautiful day, no matter how you're with us on the bridge or on the YouTube stream or watching the game on a tape delay. Doesn't matter. There's no time in the eternal. We are all together always. I want to share a couple of ideas this morning that at first may seem a little bit disjointed, but hopefully there's a common thread that will bring us back together. And if you read the email that I sent out last night, what occurred to me and what I want to explore today is this idea that we get from Zen of the beginner's mind. What is this thing called the beginner's mind? How can we have a beginner's mind? Why should we have a beginner's mind? And then that raises the question of, well, what is a beginning? What is the beginning? And if we go back and look at the book of Genesis in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, which became or is called by the Christian world the Old Testament, the very first words, and in fact the title of the book in Hebrew wasn't called Genesis, but is a word that approximately translates to in the beginning. In the beginning. And we have to consider, well, what does that mean, in the beginning? So we think of this thing called God, and the word God is just a symbol for something that has meaning to us. But what even is this thing called God? It's beyond definition. Right? The great unknowable one, the ineffable one. So we use this word, and it limits and it defines that which is beyond our definitions, beyond our understanding, intellectual understanding. But by whatever name human beings choose to call it, most consider that this thing has no beginning. It always was. It always will be. And it is. It is the same yesterday, today, and forever. How can that, which always was, have a beginning? How can it have an end? It just is. It just has the now, the present, the isness, the I amness. So we have this concept in our Judeo-Christian culture, which talks about in the beginning, but in the beginning of what? What is this beginning that it's talking about? We have this concept in Zen that said we must have a beginner's mind. And I started to wonder, are we talking about the same thing? Are these two cultures that were separated by time and space, are they pointing us back to perhaps the same underlying truth? Joseph Campbell, in his study of mythology, said if you step back far enough from mythology, you come to realize, or he came to realize, that all of these different cultures are trying to point back to a similar idea, a similar principle, if you will, a fundamental underlying truth. But each culture is telling the story in a costume and in a setting and in customs that have meaning to their particular culture. So the Iroquois Indians of the plains of North America tell a story about the origin of their food, how their food came from the gods. And the people on the South Pacific Islands also tell a story about their food and how their food came from the gods. In detail, the two stories are very different. One has to do with corn, the other has to do with coconuts, for example. the very essence, if we peel back and if we go beyond the words, if we peel back, we start to come to this idea that the two cultures are pointing to the same thing. The very food that we eat, the very bodies that consume the food, everything in the physical world somehow comes to us from the divine. And we can take that idea and we work with it. And in our human experience, so many times we see people get into conversations and they immediately start to focus on what the differences are. Well, your religion believes this, and my religion does not believe that. And if we could take a deep breath and step back far enough, we might be able to see that we're all pointing to the same thing. But we have to move beyond the detail, you see. We have to become untangled from the detail. We have to move beyond the intellect. We have to move beyond the ego. We have to move beyond words and the concepts that they represent. And we must come into some sort of experience. Some sort of experience of that pure consciousness that exists before and exists during and exists after the human intellect has assigned all kinds of details and meanings to whatever's going on. So that's where I think we're talking about the beginner's mind, and that's what I think we're talking about means in the beginning. So I just want to lay that out so we can stay together as we go through this and say, where in the world is this going? That's where we're going. That's where we're going. In fact, that's where we are. We're just becoming more aware of it. So yesterday I had a wonderful opportunity. Yesterday our daughter helped me, and we trailered the motorcycle up to the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I got to ride on the parkway, which is something that I wanted to do for a number of years. Before even I bought a bike, I wanted to do that. And I stopped at an overlook. You know, if you've ever been on the Blue Ridge Parkway, every couple miles they've got a scenic overlook for something. And a lot of them are just beautiful mountain vistas, just kind of like this opening where you're standing on the side of the mountain and you just look out and you can see for miles and miles and miles. You can just see the rolling hills and the kind of the blue haze. You know, they call them the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Smoky Mountains. And in that experience, of course, in being in a place like that, being at the edge of the ocean, looking at the stars on a clear night, you know, we kind of get a sense of the vastness of the big picture. You know, there's something that we are in and we are part of, but it is so much bigger than we are. And while I was there at the overlook, a little minivan pulled in next to me, and it was a young couple, and they had an infant with them, and they took her out to pose for pictures with mommy holding the baby with this beautiful vista in the background. She was just absolutely precious, maybe 3 or 4 years old, 3 or 4 months old, excuse me. Looked like she had just woken up for a nap, you know, she had sleep in her eyes. Clean new dress on, looked like a first child, you know, everything's brand new, no hand-me-downs. And mommy had put a little ribbon or a bow of some sort of barrette in the baby's hair, her tiny little hair. And the mom was holding her. She was just big enough that she could kind of hold herself up straight, but you know, had her head, kind of sleepy little head down on mommy's shoulder. And certainly she wasn't at the age where she could crawl much or walk, you know, that age group. And of course, Daddy's got the camera out, and he's just doting all over her, and whispering sweet nothings to her, and she's smiling back every once in a while, got a little finger in her mouth looking for a tooth, you know. Just as precious as she could be. And the contrast kind of struck me, you know. Here in the background are the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are some of the oldest mountains in America. They're so old that they're worn smooth and round, and they're low. The biggest peak we have in North Carolina is a little over 6,000 feet. And you compare that to Rocky Mountains, where you've got peaks that are 14,000 feet tall, and they're all sharp and pointed. Or go to the Alps. But these mountains are so old that they have worn down. So here we have in the background some of the oldest mountains on our continent. And here we have this precious new life, this precious little one. And I have no idea what's going through her mind at the time. I can only project my own consciousness into the situation and imagine. But she just was. The point is, she just was there. Just her presence. She was just there. And there was something so precious about that. Just a little smile from her lips, and Mommy and Daddy were just, all smiles themselves, and probably I was too, if I could see my face as I was standing there observing this situation. But she was aware. She was certainly aware. She was aware of Mommy. She was aware of Daddy. I don't know if she was, impressed the least little bit by the vista in the background. But she was awareness. She was consciousness. And she was there. And as beautiful as the scenery was, as beautiful as the mountains are, as spectacular as the trees were, as delightful as the breeze was, it was this little infant in her state of pure beingness that was the main attraction. So I started to think, just how wonderful. I know we've all had the experience, whether it be our own children, whether it be somebody in the family, of watching the little ones come into the world and watching them grow. There's the Greek philosophers who told us that, that the soul comes into the world as a blank slate, and then we start filling things into it, forming impressions, forming opinions. I'm not so certain I agree entirely with that. I believe that we were somewhere before we got here. We'll be somewhere after we leave here. But I do kind of like the ideas that we get from some of the mystical teachings, that as we come into the world, we empty ourselves out. There's an emptying process, right? Just to give you an idea, we were talking about mythology. We've all got this little indent underneath the nose, above our lip. And in one of the mystical teachings, the way that they explain it is that the soul is in its existence before this one, and in that place, the soul is a lot more aware, knows a lot more things than it knows now. But it decides to come here into this experience for a particular purpose, And once it decides to do that, then the soul becomes incarnated in a fetus. It appears into a mother's womb. It appears into a little body that's growing in a mother's womb. But while it's there, while it is in the womb, while it is growing, there's an angel that accompanies the soul. And the angel is explaining to this little soul, not little, right? The body's little, but the soul is forever. But the angel is explaining to this little being everything that it's going to need to know as it goes through this lifetime. And when everything is explained, when it's getting close to the time for this little body to be born into the world, when the angel has kind of given instructions to the baby. To me, I get the picture of the Superman movie with the baby flying in a spaceship, and the audio tapes are playing in the background where the parents are telling the little child everything it's going to need to know. So the angel explains everything that the soul is going to need to know as it goes through the lifetime. And when it's done, the angel takes its finger and it taps the little fetus right there on the top of the lip. That's what gives us the indentation. And at that moment, we empty ourselves out. We forget consciously everything that we've been told. Now that's a story, that's a teaching story, that's a mythology. And it's a beautiful way of explaining it. But I do believe that we know a lot more than we remember consciously. But nevertheless, we see these little ones kind of come into the world and watch them unfold. Watch as they grow, you know. They are aware, they are keenly aware, and they are extremely curious about their environment. And they want to explore everything. So much of what they see and what they explore, they've never seen before. It's all brand new, you know. They start out, they come into the world and they can hardly move, you know. They just basically eat and sleep. And every once in a while they move their little fingers, or they move their little toes, and the family just oohs and ahs, you know, in amazement. After a while they start to make sounds, and if you lay them down, if they're on their stomach, they can use their hands and they can lift their little head up and they can kind of look around, you know. And they're strengthening their upper body, developing the muscles that they're going to need later on in life. At some point they get up on all fours, you know, and they teeter around. They're not too steady. They get up on all fours and they take a face plant right back into the mattress, you know, but they don't seem to be hurt. They seem to be tough enough and flexible enough to be totally unfazed by it. And they get right back up and they do it again, you know. Over time they start crawling. They learn how to flip over from the crawling position to the sitting position and back to the crawling position. Someday they try to pull themselves up and stand, and they let go and they fall right back down into the sitting position. They roll right over into the crawling position and move away like nothing ever happened, you know. You imagine if that was an adult, we'd be saying, oh, what did I do wrong? What's going on? You know, is God punishing me? What's happening here? The little one is just purely aware. Just pure consciousness, you see, not putting judgments that we know on it, but just having the experience, just having the experience. But what happens over time, see, as we develop, there's 2 points I wanted to make here. One is that we can see this unfolding in an individual child in our family, you know, or someone close to us, or these days on Facebook, as grandma posts 10,000 pictures every week of the little one growing. We can see over time, we can see how they develop, but yet they are part of something much bigger, you see. They're not doing this all on their own. They didn't create their own little bodies. There is something much bigger unfolding through them and as them, that we can take children all over the world and we can watch them develop. And there's certain stages that they go through: the lifting of the head, the getting up on all fours, the beginning to crawl, putting the hand in the mouth and looking for the tooth. This is part of a bigger pattern of development. So there is this individual and this individuality, and then there is this unity. There is this oneness. There is this something bigger that is pressing itself through and pushing itself through. And over time, we tend to lose sight of that. Both we, the parents and the grandparents and the people who are observing, and the child itself. The child starts to form opinions. It starts to make judgments. It starts to decide, based on the experience that it's had, based on what it's been told by its parents and the people around it, it starts to form judgments. It forms mental concepts about the way things are and the way things ought to be, you know. So they go to touch something and the parents say, don't touch that, you know. Don't touch that. That's not good. Don't touch that. And after a while, they form an opinion that whatever that is, they shouldn't touch that. That's not good. And from that point on, they're no longer reacting to their own awareness of it. They're reacting to their concept of it. They're reacting to the way that they believe that it is, the way that they believe that it ought to be. What happens is our concepts start to limit us. They start to hold us back. We can't move beyond our concepts. We can no longer see things as they really are. We see them as we think they ought to be. We're stuck in a loop of our own way of thinking. We expect things to be a certain way. We observe them. We decide that, yep, they're exactly the way that we thought they ought to be, and we move along. Right? This is how prejudice develops. This is how bigotry develops. All those people over there, well, they're like this, so don't go hang out with them. We expect them to be that way. We take in facts and data that support our belief. We ignore facts and data that don't support our belief. And at that point in our lives, what's happening is we are not living in the world as it is. We are living in the world as we think it is. So if we want to make progress, what we're going to have to do is go back to that beginner's mind. We're going to have to go back to that point. We're going to have to go back to that point where we didn't have all these ideas, where we didn't have all of these prejudices, didn't have all these expectations, but we just kind of observe things as they are. In Zen, they might call it the original mind. The original mind. Now here's kind of just an example. You know, if you try to learn a skill, let's talk about playing golf, for example. We've all seen golf games on TV. You know. Now you could go down at a range, you could get a club, you could buy a bucket of balls, and you could go stand there at the tee, and you could start hitting balls, and you could do that, you know, for several hours a day, and you could do it every day of the week for a year or so, and after a while you'd be pretty good. You know, you'd be able to hit the ball and get the ball to go some distance from the tee. But along the way, what would happen is you would have developed many bad habits. You would have developed some techniques that eventually come to limit you. You know? So maybe you're self-taught, and maybe you can drive the golf ball 250 yards. You think that's pretty good until you stand next to somebody who can drive it 400 yards. And you say, wow, you know, how did they do that? So you go and you get a coach. And the coach is somebody who observes you. The coach observes you and is able to see the things that you are doing that you take for granted. You do them without conscious awareness. You do them because over time you have decided this is the way to do them, consciously or not, and you continue to act out of your mental patterns. You continue to act out of your belief system, out of your experience. So the first thing the coach does is the coach takes you back to the beginning, to the fundamentals, to the beginning. Let me see your stance. Let me see your grip. Let me see your takeaway. Let me see your backswing. You know. Let me see your swing. Let me see your follow through. All right, now let's start at the beginning, because you've got to stand a certain way. If you're not standing a certain way, if your stance is all wrong, you're never going to be able to produce a good swing. Let me see your grip. If you're not holding the club the right way, it doesn't matter how you stand, because you're never going to be able to have a good swing. And they break this kind of fluid movement, which is a golf swing. They break it down into individual components. And they start with the very first one, the beginning. How do you stand? How do you hold the club? And by going back and changing, by going back and forgetting everything that you knew, everything that you taught yourself or learned that may have been wrong, by emptying yourself of this incorrect knowledge, it is only then that you can make progress. You have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to a beginner's mind. You have to go back and assume I don't know anything about this. If I do know anything about this, whatever I knew is probably wrong, or possibly wrong. And I'm willing to let go. I'm willing to let go of it because if I don't, I can't go any further. I'm going to be stuck hitting the ball at 225 yards forever when everybody else is hitting the ball at 400 yards. So there comes a time, if we want to make progress, we have to go back to the beginning. So now we come over to the book of Genesis, and we say, well, what is this beginning? What is this beginning? And typically what people interpret when they read these words, they think, well, it was the beginning of creation. You know, it was in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. And we say, well, wait a minute. Let me think about that. How does this creative process work? How does this creative process work in this life? And we think about it, we study it, we practice it in our own lives. Excuse me while I get a little sip of water here. That this thing that we call God, the divine, is conscious. It is conscious awareness. But there is a part of it that acts as law. We call it law, a blind force, if you will. That takes whatever it is that the conscious part of the divine wants. You may call it the Father in traditional theology, the Father, the Holy Spirit, the Son. That which decides, that which does, the doer of the word, and then the manifestation of the word. So there is a part of the divine that is thinking, that chooses to have a particular experience. And remember, we said the divine is pure consciousness, pure awareness. It decides to have this experience. And then something acting upon as law, something acting as law acts upon that word. And that something that acts as law must be also some part of the divine, because God is all there is. And then whatever it is that the divine wishes to experience becomes being and becoming, as Fenwick Holmes would tell us. God is. But God is always becoming, because it's always thinking. The law is always working. There is always creation. So how could there be a beginning if God is eternal and timeless? It never was. It was never born. It will never die. It just is. It is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It just is. So if God always was, or more correctly, God is, and there's no past or future, there's just now. There's just this moment now. And if the law is always acting, then this thing that we call creation always was. There cannot be a time where there was not something that was created. There can never be a time, as we experience time, there can never be a time where there isn't creation. Creation is a process that is always going on. It is always the beginning. Always. Because the divine is always thinking. And I went back and I started to look at this, at the meaning of the Hebrew word that's used for in the beginning. And I found a little post by a rabbi talking about it. And it was I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the way that he kind of explained it. Now I've got to give you a little bit of culture when you go into this and you start to study. In the teachings, when you go into the Hebrew teachings, every letter of every word has a meaning. So kind of the deeper mystical meanings, when we were studying the Kabbalah, you know, why a particular letter was placed in a particular word, why they were arranged in a certain sequence. Um, I'll give you an example. But if you go through some of the books of the Bible, and you count the number of words in each verse, and then you count the number of verses in each chapter, as the story progresses with the next chapter, each verse gets another word. So it may start off with 7 words and then 8 words and so on like that. And then each chapter might get an additional line. So the first one might start off with 7 verses and then 8 verses and then 9 verses and so on. And there's these patterns that scholars will find as they go through. And what you have to understand when you're looking at the cultures is not just the words that you're reading. It's the way that they're placed and the order in which they're placed. And it's this bigger structure that they're part of. The baby in the crib is an individual learning how to crawl. It is part of the bigger structure of God's life. The words as they're written down are individual words with individual meanings, but unless you can understand the bigger picture and the context into which they fit, you miss something. You miss something along the way. And that's part of what the rabbi was explaining as he went through this, that the word that is normally translated in the beginning is a word that always comes in pairs. You know, it's a kind of a two nouns that go together. You know, in our language we would say doorknob, doornail. These are 2 words that go together, but they have a very different meaning when they go together. So this word that is normally translated in the beginning always has something that goes with it, or it usually has something that goes with it. But the way that it's used in the opening lines of the Old Testament, the Torah, it doesn't. It's a grammatical change. There's a shift there. It's not written as it should be. And it's done for effect. You know, sometimes people will deliberately make a grammatical error. You'll hear people in our society, in our language, say something that they know is not grammatically correct to draw attention, to make a joke, you know. I always tell people that I was born in Brooklyn, and there we learned how to speak more gooder than other places, you know. It's a joke. The misuse of the grammar brings attention to something. And what the rabbi was saying is that the misuse of the grammar as he sees it, his opinion as he sees it, begs the question, in the beginning of what? In the beginning of what? Because it doesn't answer the question. Wherever the word is used otherwise, other than in the scripture, there's got to be a what. In the beginning of this, in the beginning of that. But the way that it's written in the Hebrew, it's not. And his interpretation as he goes on is that the beginning is always beginning. So he kind of comes to, in the beginning of that which is always beginning. In the beginning of that which is always beginning, God created. In the beginning of that which is always beginning, God created. This kind of goes in line with something I believe Meister Eckhart said around the year 1300. There wasn't only one only begotten, but the divine is always begetting the only begotten. Each and every one of us is the only begotten. Creation is always beginning. The creative process is always beginning. Something new is always beginning. Something new is always unfolding. Every moment. Something is beginning. Something is beginning. So the divine mind is always thinking, and there's a part of the divine that acts as law, that is always acting, and creation is always beginning. So every moment is the beginning. Every moment is the beginning. Now what happens to us, as we go through life is we lose sight of that. We lose sight of that. We get caught up in the details. We get caught up in the drama. We get caught up in everything that is going around us, everything that is happening to us and through us. We get so involved in the nitty-gritty that we lose sight of the big picture. We lose sight of the fact that that infant is part of a bigger expression of life. Zen kind of talks about we have to come to an understanding of duality and unity, of mind and body, of individuality in singularity. And in their way of teaching, it's wrong to say that there is no body, there is only mind, or there is no mind, there is only body. That there is mind and there is body, there is duality. But the duality is one. To me, it's kind of like in Christianity, we say there's one God but three persons. There's singularity and there's multiplicity. So in Zen, they go back to the beginning and they say when you sit, you cross your legs so that your left leg is on your left foot is on your right thigh, your right thigh is on your right foot is on your left thigh. And now left and right are crisscrossed. They are one. You hold your hands in a certain way so the left becomes right and the right becomes left and there is one. There is still a left and a right, but the duality is expressing itself as singularity. And to them that is important because it helps us to get back to the beginner's mind. The place where even though there is duality, there is singularity. The place where we can at the same time recognize that we are individuals, but we are an individualized expression of the divine. The place where all of the dramas of the mind, right? As I said at the beginning, we at some point we're no longer reacting or dealing with things the way they are. We're dealing with our concepts of them. And if we really wish to experience life, the capital L, life as it is, we have to get past those concepts. We have to go back to that awareness, the pure awareness that the infant child represented at the beginning of the story. This pure awareness of just being. And letting go of all of our opinions and letting go of all of our prejudices and letting go of all of our concepts and just coming to the point of experiencing the isness. Experiencing the isness. So if we think then about the creative process in the individual, we too are always creating, or we are always involved in the creative process, perhaps is a better way of putting it, because there's always something going on in our awareness, in our consciousness, in our minds. But it's like we've relinquished control. We've relinquished awareness of what we're even thinking. We have become so accustomed to our concepts of the way things are and the way things ought to be, excuse me, that we really don't go back to the beginning, to the beginner's mind, to the beginner's consciousness, and think about what we're doing. We are acting and reacting out of something that we've been programmed to do. And for that reason, much of what we bring into our lives looks very much like what we've already brought into our lives. So what we want to do, we want to grow spiritually, right? That's kind of the reason that we're here together. We want to grow spiritually. There's a creative process that responds to us according to our belief. But do we want to create out of the beliefs that we have adopted over the years of conditioning by society and our observations and the things, the inferences that we've drawn out of our experiences? Or do we want to go to a place before and beyond all of those concepts and create from that place? As Rumi said, beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field. I will meet you there. Do we want to go to that field? Do we want to go to that field and bring something forth anew? So what this means to me, what this brings me back to in my way of being, in my way of thinking, in my way of experiencing is that everything that we do, everything that we bring into creation by our use, whether conscious or unconscious, but hopefully conscious, everything that we bring into experience by cooperating deliberately with the power by which prayer is answered, the law of mind, that which responds to us according to our belief, everything that we bring into this world can be either a projection of our human consciousness, our human prejudices, our human ideas, our human conditioning, or they can be an expression of this bigger life that brought us here. They can be the divine actually expressing, enjoying, and experiencing itself in some unique, wonderful way through us. See, we have to go through that period of time of developing our own uniqueness. We have to go through that period of time of developing and forming our opinions and figuring out the way things are and the way things ought to be. And then at some point we say, wait a second, it doesn't have to be like that at all. But as we go back into the creative process, and we started off naturally with awareness, and then that awareness kind of focused down and narrowed and narrowed and narrowed down to our personality and our way of being. Now we can open back up. Now we can open back up. And we can bring our uniqueness. We can bring our uniqueness that we've developed as individuals. We can bring our uniqueness back into the creative process, and we can say, wait a minute now. Wait a minute now. In this place of original awareness, in this place of isness, in this place of beingness, what is it that God, the divine, would express as me today? What is it that it would enjoy as me today? How will it love as me today? How will it share as me today? How will it be purely aware of its own magnificence through me today? Our life at that time becomes less about the self, the ego self, the little s self. And it becomes more about the self. We go through life with a conscious awareness that there's two things going on at the same time, but they're really one. There is the duality and there is the singularity. It seems as if there is God, and it seems as if there is me. And then there is the awareness that it is God as me. My own individual desires take back seat. My own ego takes back seat. And it becomes a matter of, through my spiritual practice, I can sit in stillness until all of the drama ideas that go through mind fall away, and I start to taste the sweetness of the original mind, of that which exists at the beginning, you see, at the beginning of this creative process, at the beginning of that which is coming into experience today. Now it's a spiritual quest, a spiritual adventure. It's not just a getting busy and go to work and do stuff kind of day. It is a day that the magnificence of the divine is expressing through me today, expressing to me today. It is all around me today. And I want to go back to the beginner's mind, to the fundamentals. And I want to use my spiritual practice and my spiritual techniques, just like the golf coach teaches you stance and grip and take away and swing and all those things. I want to go back and I want to start at the beginning, which is the awareness of God. The first step in treatment. What do you know about God? I just don't want to think it. I want to sit in my spiritual practice, in my prayer, in my meditation. I want to sit there until I feel the presence of the divine. I want to feel that it has created me out of itself, and there is a oneness that appears as duality, but nevertheless it's a oneness. There's not God and me. There is God as me and God through me. And I accept my unique place as a new beginning in the creative process, bringing something wonderful, something new, something that has never been before, something that only can come through me because of my uniqueness. Whether it be art or song or science or love or compassion, whatever it is, there's a way that it comes through me that I am uniquely qualified for. I come to sit until I realize that it must be so because it's for this purpose I have come. And that the entire universe is for me and nothing is against me. And I can stop worrying about it because it's already done. The power that created the universe when Spirit said, let there be, has taken it and is making it so. To be in the moment, to be in the experience, and yet to be aware of the presence of something so much bigger. That's what I'm talking about. So when I finished riding yesterday, we put the bike back on the trailer and we started to head back down the mountain, and our daughter was driving, and she was asking me how it was, because I've wanted to do this for a number of years. And I was explaining to her all of the technical details of riding a motorcycle on mountain roads, the gears you got to shift through, and trying to lean into the turn when the road was leaning the other way, and looks like you're on level ground and you can't get any power because you're really going up a grade, and all of those kind of techie details I was into the details. And she said, but was it beautiful? But was it beautiful? And I said, yes, it was. It was very beautiful. But while I was riding, I couldn't pay attention to the beauty. You know what I'm talking about? You're riding down the road and you say, oh, look over there, isn't that? And of course, things that you're driving tend to go in the direction you're looking. So you turn your head to the left, and before you know it, you're across the center line. So what I had to do as I was riding was I had to develop an awareness of the big picture, an awareness of being in this spectacular beauty, in the trees and the mountains and the air and all of those things. I was aware that I was in this bigger picture. But at the same time, I was doing doing the things that I had to do to safely ride. Shifting gears, leaning the right way, all those kinds of things. So what I would like to leave you with is this idea is that right now is the beginning. Right now is the beginning of a new creative process in your life. Right now, the original mind, the unfettered mind, right? The mind that knows no limitations or boundaries, right now that pure mind of God, that pure awareness is ready, willing, and able to come through your experience into fruition in this world. It is just seeking your cooperation. Can you let go of all of your opinions about the way it should be or it ought to be? Can you let go of all your prejudices and your bigotries? Can you go back to the Zen mind and the beginner's mind and just be at home with the presence before all of the ideas distract you? And from that place which is consciousness, can you invite something wonderful and something magnificent to come into being? Each of us as children learn how to push off the crib. Each of us as children learn how to get up and crawl. Each of us as children learn how to walk. But where we go is up to us. The power that created the universe created you and I. It created us and left us alone to discover that there is a creative process that is working with us and through us. Where we go with that is up to us. Let's start at the beginning. Let's empty our minds of all the clutter. Let's sit in quiet until we are still and we know. And from that place, let us speak the word. Let it be in our own lives. What would God do as you today? What would God do through you today? What would God do as you today? If you would only take time to go to the beginning and let it unfold in its natural sequence. And so it is.